I was sitting on a balcony in Medellin, Colombia, watching the city lights flicker across the valley below, drinking a cup of coffee that cost me less than $1 and tasted better than anything I'd had in 30 years of marriage when my phone buzzed with a text from my daughter. She was getting married in 6 weeks, and she wanted to know if I'd come. I put the phone face down on the table and looked at those lights for a long time. Let me back up. I spent 32 years as a mechanical engineer in Charlotte, North Carolina. 32 years of early mornings, long commutes, and weekend overtime. I gave everything I had to that career, and I gave what was left to my marriage. My wife, I'll call her my ex-wife now, was a woman I'd loved since I was 26 years old. She was smart, she was beautiful, and she had a way of making me feel like the most capable man in the room when she wanted to. The problem is, she didn't always want to. Somewhere around year 20, the warmth started going out. I noticed it the way you notice the days getting shorter in October. Slowly, then all at once. She stopped asking about my day. I stopped expecting her to. We became two people managing a household instead of two people building a life. I told myself it was normal. I told myself every long marriage had its seasons. I told myself a lot of things that weren't true. What I didn't tell myself was the thing I'd been avoiding for years, that there was someone else. I found out the way most men my age find out, not from evidence I went looking for, from evidence that walked right up and introduced itself. I came home early one afternoon. I'd had a headache and left work around 2, and found a car in my driveway I didn't recognize. A grey BMW 5 Series, newer model, parked where I usually parked. I sat in my own car for a full minute. I think part of me already knew. I went inside. I won't describe what I found in detail, but I will say this. There was a man in my house who was not me, and he was not there to fix the plumbing. His name doesn't matter. I'll call him what my daughter called him 6 months later when she announced her engagement to him, her future stepfather. A man she called ambitious, successful, and driven. A man she said had given her mother a new sense of joy. I was 61 years old, standing in my own kitchen, trying to figure out how to feel. What happened next was quieter than you might expect. There was no screaming, no throwing things. My ex-wife came downstairs and we looked at each other across the kitchen island, and I said very calmly, "I think we both know what happens now." She didn't argue. She didn't cry. At least not right then. She just nodded. And that nod, that single quiet nod, told me more about how long this had been going on than any confession could have. The divorce took 8 months. Our lawyers did most of the talking. We'd kept our finances fairly separate over the years, which turned out to be one of the smartest things I'd ever done without knowing I was doing it. The house we split. The retirement accounts we split. There was no dramatic courtroom battle, just paperwork and signatures, and a judge who wished us both well in a tone that suggested he'd seen this particular story many, many times before. I retired at the same time. I'd been planning to work another 3 years, but the divorce made me think differently about time. How much of it I had left, how I wanted to use it. I'd done the math 100 times. I had enough. Social Security would kick in within a couple years. My pension was solid. I didn't need to keep working for the money. I'd been keeping working because I didn't know what else to do with myself. That's a hard thing to admit when you're 61. That your job had been filling a hole that your marriage had stopped filling years before. A friend of mine, a man I'd worked with for over a decade, the kind of friend who tells you the truth when everyone else is being polite, was the one who said it plainly. We were having lunch about a month after the divorce was finalized, and he looked at me across the table and said, "You've been running on empty for years. You know that, right? What are you going to do now that you don't have to?" I didn't have an answer, so I did something I'd never done in my adult life. I opened a laptop, I went to a travel website, and I bought a one-way ticket, Medellin, Colombia. I'd read about it in a magazine at my doctor's office of all places. An article about retirees who'd left the US and found something they weren't expecting. Lower cost of living. Warm weather year-round. A city that had reinvented itself and wasn't shy about saying so. I figured if a whole city could start over, maybe a 61-year-old engineer from Charlotte could too. My daughter did not take this well. She was 29 at the time, living in Raleigh, working in pharmaceutical sales. She'd always been closer to her mother. Not in a way that excluded me, but in a way that was simply true. When I told her I was moving to Colombia, she went quiet in a way that felt louder than any argument. "You're running away," she said. "I'm retiring," I said. "Dad, Colombia. People live there," I said. "Regular people. Millions of them." She didn't come around right away, but she also didn't cut me off. We talked every Sunday, video calls, and slowly she started to see that I wasn't falling apart. I was actually genuinely, for the first time in a long time, okay. I found an apartment in the El Poblado neighborhood. Clean, modern, a balcony with a view of the mountains, cost me about $1,400 a month, including utilities. Back in Charlotte, I'd been paying 3 times that for a mortgage on a house I rattled around in alone. I hired a Spanish tutor who came 3 mornings a week. I found a coffee shop where the owner, a man in his late 60s with a white mustache and very strong opinions about brewing temperatures, took a liking to me and started teaching me things about coffee I hadn't known existed. I started sleeping 8 hours a night. That doesn't sound like much, but I hadn't done it consistently in 20 years. I was in Colombia for about 4 months when my daughter called on a Sunday with a different kind of quiet. "Mom's getting engaged," she said. I waited. "To him," she said. "They're getting married in the spring." I said, "Okay." She seemed surprised I didn't have more to say. Honestly, I didn't. The man had been in my ex-wife's life long enough, clearly, that this wasn't sudden, and I was 4,000 miles away on a balcony with a cup of coffee. Whatever I felt in that moment was more like a distant echo than a wound. What I wasn't prepared for was the next part. "She asked me to be her maid of honor," my daughter said, "and she wants to know if you'd be okay with that." "That's between you and your mother," I said. "I know. I wanted to tell you first." I appreciated that. I told her so. What I did not know, what I had no idea about for another 2 months, was what had been happening with the money. My friend back in Charlotte, the truth teller, called me on a Tuesday evening in February. He had a voice that never changed whether he was telling you good news or bad, which made it hard to read. He said, "I need to tell you something and I need you to sit down." I was already sitting. I sat down harder. He told me that my ex-wife and her fiancé had been running a financial consulting business together. Not a new development, apparently. They'd been operating it for over 2 years, and in the process of setting things up, they had taken out a line of credit in the amount of $60,000, using my name as a co-signer on documentation that I had never seen. He'd heard about it from a mutual acquaintance who worked at the bank. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment because it wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't rage. It was a cold, clarifying kind of focus. The same feeling I used to get when an engineering problem revealed itself to be much more serious than the initial diagnosis suggested. You set aside the emotion, you assess the situation, you figure out what needs to happen. I called my attorney the next morning, Charlotte time, 9 a.m. sharp. She was efficient, my attorney. She'd handled the divorce, and she knew the players. She pulled the records. The credit line was real. My name was on it. The signature was a close approximation of mine, but not mine. She used the word forgery in a way that made it sound like she'd been expecting this call. We filed the appropriate complaints. The bank was notified. The documentation was turned over to the relevant authorities. I will not say it was a simple process because it was not. It took months and several phone calls I'd rather not have made. But I will say this, when you have a paper trail and a good lawyer, and the facts are on your side, the facts eventually do what they're supposed to do. My ex-wife's fiancé, the ambitious one, had some explaining to do. What I didn't plan on was my daughter finding out the way she did. It was April by then. The wedding was 6 weeks out. She'd been deep in maid of honor duties. Dress fittings, venue coordination, all of it. She called me on a Sunday and there was something different in her voice. Not the quiet of discomfort. Something heavier. "Dad," she said, "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Did you know about the credit line? With the business?" I paused. "How did you find out?" "I overheard them arguing," she said. "Last night when I was staying at Mom's. He said your name and then he said something about a signature. And she said it was fine, it was handled, and I just... Dad, what's going on?" I told her the truth. All of it. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't editorialize. I just laid out the facts the way my attorney had laid them out to me. There was a long silence when I finished. She knew, my daughter said. It wasn't a question. I believe she did, I said. Another silence. I let her have it. I don't know what to do, she said finally. You don't have to decide anything tonight, I said. You don't have to decide anything until you're ready. This is between me and your mother legally. You don't have to be in the middle of it. But I'm the maid of honor, she said. I'm supposed to stand up there next to her in 5 weeks. I know, I said, and that's your decision, not mine. She didn't call for 4 days after that. I gave her the space. On the 5th day she called and said, I'm still going to the wedding. She's still my mother. But I need you to know that I see what happened. And I'm sorry I called you selfish when you moved. That hit me harder than I expected. I had to clear my throat before I answered. The wedding was in late May, a Saturday afternoon at a venue outside Raleigh. I was not there, obviously. I was in Medellin, where it was a warm evening, and I was having dinner with my Spanish tutor and his wife and 2 other couples, a pleasant table of 6, and I had what I can only describe as a genuinely good time. My daughter called me that evening, later, after the reception. She sounded tired. How was it? I asked. She took a breath. Something happened at the ceremony, she said. During the reception, after the vows, when the toasts were happening, one of the guests had stood up. An older man, a business associate of the groom's, apparently someone who'd had a few drinks more than was advisable. And in the middle of his toast he said with absolute cheerfulness, I hear the paperwork situation got sorted out. Glad you two could get things cleaned up before the wedding. He seemed to think this was a light-hearted comment. He had no idea that most of the people in that room didn't know about any paperwork situation. My ex-wife had gone completely white, according to my daughter. Her new husband had started to say something and then stopped. There was a silence over that reception hall that my daughter described as the kind that doesn't end, it just gets covered over. My ex-wife had excused herself. She was in the bathroom for 20 minutes. When she came back out, the party continued. But something had shifted. 2 weeks later, I received an email from my ex-wife's personal account. It was 4 sentences long. She said she wanted me to know she was sorry for how things had ended. She said she knew an apology didn't fix anything. She said she hoped I was well. She said she was glad I was happy. I read it twice. I didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say that would have made anything better or worse. What was done, and I had made my peace with it months before she found hers. But the call I wasn't expecting, the one that actually made me set down my coffee and stand up from my chair, came 3 weeks after that, on a Sunday morning in June. It was my daughter. I got you a ticket, she said, to come visit. You've been in Colombia for almost a year, and I haven't seen you, and I miss you, and I'm coming to see where you live. She booked herself a week in Medellin. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon, looking slightly overwhelmed by the airport and slightly more relaxed by the time we got to the apartment, and she walked out onto the balcony and looked at the mountains. Oh, she said, just act. We spent a week doing the things you do when someone you love comes to see you in a place you built for yourself. I took her to the coffee shop with the man with the white mustache, who immediately adopted her with the kind of enthusiasm that older men reserve for young women who showed genuine interest in what they love. I took her to a market. I walked her through the neighborhood. I showed her the little routines I'd built, the early morning walk, the $2 breakfast at the place on the corner, the afternoon reading on the balcony. On the last night she was there, we sat outside after dinner, and she said, "You actually seem happy, like genuinely." "I am," I said. "I didn't think you were capable of it," she said. Not like, I didn't mean that badly. I just mean I'd never seen it before. Not in a long time. That stung a little, and it was also completely the truth. I spent 30 years trying to make myself smaller so everything would fit, I said. I kept waiting for it to get easier. It didn't. But this, I gestured at the city, the lights, the mountains. This is what happens when you stop waiting and just go. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I told Mom I came to visit you." "What did she say?" "She said she was glad." She sounded like she meant it. I thought about that for a moment, not with bitterness. with something closer to, I don't know, a kind of tired understanding. People want things to go one way and the world goes another, and the lucky ones figure out how to live in the gap. There's a thing people say. I've heard it my whole life, growing up in church, in my community, from my own mother, about God working in ways that don't announce themselves. I used to say it back by rote. I didn't always feel it, but I tell you, when I look at the last 2 years of my life, at the way the worst thing that happened to me turned out to be the thing that finally woke me up, I believe it more than I ever have. Not because everything worked out perfectly. It didn't. There are things I grieve still. 30 years is 30 years. There are Saturday mornings I remember, and small moments I'll carry quietly forever. But grief and gratitude aren't opposites. I've learned that. You can hold both. You can miss something and also know that moving on was the right thing to do. My daughter is coming back in the fall. She's talking about spending 2 weeks this time. She mentioned almost in passing that she might look into whether her company has remote work options. I didn't say anything. I just smiled and poured us both another cup of coffee. The man with the white mustache says I'm finally starting to understand how to brew it right. He's particular about these things. He says it takes as long as it takes, and you can't rush it. And when it's ready, you'll know. I think he might be talking about more than coffee.